3 years. That's how long I spent building a life with someone who saw me as a backup plan. I think back on it now, and I can still remember the moments that should have felt special, but never quite did. You know that feeling? Like you're giving all of yourself to someone, and yet they're not really there with you. It was one of those ordinary days, the kind where you expect nothing to happen, that things began to shift. I was on my way to work, running late as usual, and the train was delayed. Nothing new, right? We've all been there. But it wasn't the delay that stood out. It was him. Kenny. I wasn't looking for anyone that day. I wasn't expecting a thing, but somehow he found me. It was just a casual encounter at first, you know? I'd barely even noticed him at first. He was standing near the door, glancing at his phone. I was scrolling through mine, waiting for the train to move. Then, out of nowhere, he made some comment about the weather being as unpredictable as the trains. It was so simple, but it caught me off guard. I laughed and we started talking. What struck me about him right away was how easy it felt. He wasn't trying to impress me, didn't have that forced charm that some people put on. It was like he was just being himself, and that made him stand out. We talked about everything and nothing, life, work, meaning. He said something that stayed with me. I just want to do something that matters, you know? Something that feels real. And it hit me. That was something I hadn't really thought about in a long time. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the time the train started moving again, it felt like we'd known each other for far longer than just a few minutes. There was a quiet connection, one that didn't need to be forced or rushed. For the first time in a long while, I felt like someone was really listening, really hearing me. Have you ever met someone by total accident who ended up changing everything? For better or worse? If you have, I'd love to hear your story in the comments, because this is mine. The early days with Kenny felt like something out of a dream. It was all texts that went on for hours, late-night coffees shared over the phone, and this undeniable chemistry between us that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was easy, light. It felt like we were both discovering something new. Not just about each other, but about ourselves too. I remember the way he'd send me these long, thoughtful messages, and I'd stay up way past midnight just reading them over and over. Kenny was in between jobs at the time, and it wasn't for lack of trying. He'd go on interviews, and every time it felt like he was just one step away from landing something great. But somehow, it never worked out. It wasn't that he wasn't qualified. He was. But there was always something, some little detail, that seemed to slip through. He'd shrug it off with a quiet laugh, like it wasn't a big deal. But I could see the disappointment in his eyes every time it happened. I wanted to fix it for him, make everything better. But of course, I couldn't. I'd always been the practical type, so when things started getting tight for him financially, I thought, why not help? He was spending more time at my place anyway, and the idea of him getting his life back on track felt like something I wanted to be a part of. So, one evening, over dinner, I casually said, "Hey, why don't you just move in? I've got the space, and it'll make things easier for both of us." It wasn't about romance, not really. It was about being practical, offering a helping hand when things weren't going as planned. He seemed hesitant at first, like he didn't want to impose. But I insisted. It felt like the right thing to do. And, to be honest, I never thought twice about it. But as time went on, something started to shift. I didn't realize at first, but I started to take on more of the financial weight. Little by little, his share of things dwindled, and I was left picking up the slack, paying for meals, covering rent when it got tight, buying the essentials. It wasn't a huge deal at the time. I just figured he'd bounce back soon enough, and I didn't mind doing it, But slowly, it became a bit heavier. A bit more of a responsibility than I'd expected. And I remember one night, as I was doing the math in my head, wondering how I was going to cover everything, I realized how much I'd taken on. I had never planned for it to be this way. It didn't feel like enabling at the time. It felt like love. I was giving. Because that's what love is, right? It's not about keeping score. It's about lifting the other person up. Being there when they need it most. And that's what I thought I was doing. But somewhere along the way, it became more than just a helping hand. It became a crutch. And I didn't see it coming. At first, it was small things. Little signs I brushed off because I didn't want to see them. There was the time I noticed a few unauthorized charges on my credit card. At first, I assumed it was just a mistake or maybe a mix-up. After all, Kenny wasn't the type to go around spending money irresponsibly. But then it happened again, and again. Each time I confronted him, and each time he'd apologize, insist it was an accident, something that slipped through the cracks. He'd give me this heartfelt look, tell me how grateful he was for everything I'd done for him, how much he appreciated my support, and I believed him. I wanted to believe him. But looking back, I see now how easily he played on my emotions. He had this way of making me feel needed, like everything he was doing was for us, for our future. He'd talk about how lucky he was to have me in his life, how he'd never find anyone else who understood him the way I did. He made me feel special, irreplaceable. In hindsight, it was emotional flattery, designed to distract me from what was really happening. There was also the freeloading. It was subtle at first, easy to overlook. But eventually, it became too obvious to ignore. He'd spend all his time at home, never offering to pitch in or help out with groceries or bills. When I would bring it up, he'd make it sound like I was being unreasonable, or he'd make excuses. Things were tough. He was still looking for work. It wasn't the right time. And every time I'd let it slide, because I didn't want to make him feel bad. I wanted to believe in him. I wanted to believe that eventually things would turn around. But then Jay, one of my closest friends, spoke up. He'd been quiet about it for a while, but one afternoon, as we were sitting together, he finally said what I'd been avoiding. "You need to wake up. This isn't right. He's taking advantage of you and you're letting him." I remember feeling a cold rush of disbelief. My mind immediately went into defense mode. Jay didn't know Kenny like I did. He didn't understand the connection we shared, the things Kenny had been through, the promises he'd made. But Jay wasn't wrong. The signs had been there for so long, and I'd ignored them because I didn't want to face the truth. It wasn't until one day, when I went to the kitchen to grab something, that the reality of it hit me. My fridge was practically empty. There were a few leftovers, a half-finished carton of milk, and that was it. But I'd been spending more and more at the grocery store, on utilities, on anything to keep things running smoothly. I couldn't understand how the fridge could be so bare, how the bills could still be piling up. Where was all the money going? It was a small thing, but it hit me hard. And suddenly, I started to see all the other little signs that had been right in front of me. The way Kenny had been so charming, so convincing, but never quite delivering. The way I had been giving more than I realized, and he had been taking more than I was willing to admit. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The weight of it all was starting to sink in, and it hit me. Sometimes you don't realize you're drowning until your feet can't find the bottom. You think you're swimming, keeping your head above water, but the moment you look down, you see how deep it's gotten. That was my turning point. I knew something had to change, but I didn't know how. All I knew was that I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. It started out so simple. Kenny invited me to dinner one evening, said it would be a nice, quiet night out. Nothing fancy. Just us, talking like we used to. But from the moment I walked into the restaurant, something felt different. The atmosphere felt off. It wasn't the place or the food. It was him. He seemed distant, like his mind was elsewhere. It was almost as if he was holding something back, and I didn't know what. We sat down, and he immediately started talking about something that didn't seem to fit the mood. He mentioned his fiancée. Fiancée? I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. I asked him to repeat himself, but he just nodded, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Yeah, I'm seeing someone seriously now. We've been talking about getting engaged for a while. His voice was casual, too casual, and my heart was already sinking. At first, I thought I must have misunderstood. I mean, we'd been together for months, and he was acting like he had no idea what I was feeling. How could I not have known about this? How could he have been planning a future with someone else while I was here, in the dark? As if on cue, our friends started casually mentioning her too, as if they didn't realize the weight of what they were saying. "Oh, Kenny's fiancée is such a sweetheart," one of them said, a little too cheerfully. "You should meet her sometime, now that everything's settled." Another friend mentioned seeing them on a date the weekend before and how happy they looked together. It felt like someone had slapped me across the face. The words hit me, but it didn't quite register until they mentioned her name. That name. My mind couldn't process it. I was still trying to hold it together, but the truth was sinking in. He had been seeing someone else while we were together. Not just seeing her, but planning a future. And I had been blind to it, too caught up in the life I thought we were building. The breaking point came later that night, when I went through my phone, trying to make sense of everything. I went to Instagram. Kenny's feed was public, after all. What I found there made my stomach drop. Pictures. Lots of them. Kenny and this woman, on the beach, laughing in the sun, holding hands like nothing in the world could touch them. Date nights. Trips they had taken. Smiles that weren't for me. But the worst part? There was a picture of her wearing an engagement ring. A beautiful, sparkling ring that looked new, and my heart just shattered. He had been planning this whole thing while I had been pouring everything I had into our relationship, believing in us, believing that we were on the same page. He hadn't just moved on from me. He'd moved on to her. And I hadn't even been given the courtesy of knowing. But it got worse. Much worse. I confronted him the next day, hoping it was all some mistake, some misunderstanding. But as the words tumbled out, he didn't even seem shocked. It was like he'd already rehearsed the answer, like he knew this moment would come. "You're right," he said softly, almost too gently. "I did propose to her. I told you I was visiting my family that weekend. But the truth is, I went to see her. I wanted to scream, to demand answers. But all I could do was stare at him, the weight of his betrayal crashing down on me. It wasn't just that he had moved on. It was how he'd done it. How he'd lied to me, made me believe that we were building something when in reality, he was building something else with someone else entirely. And then came the final blow, the one that made everything worse. "I used your credit card," he said, almost in passing, like it wasn't a big deal. "I used it to buy her ring." I didn't know how to respond. The room spun. My mind couldn't process it. He had used me, my trust, my resources, my love, to finance his betrayal. I had been there, supporting him, lifting him up, thinking I was doing something good. All the while, he was preparing to hurt me in the worst way possible. The anger didn't come right away. First, it was disbelief. Then, a deep sadness settled in. It was like I was seeing the whole relationship through a new lens, one that was painfully clear. The trust, the care, the promises, all shattered, all for nothing. He had built a life with someone else, and I had been nothing more than a stepping stone. A ring that wasn't meant for me, in the end. Kenny walked in like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. He smiled when he saw me, that same smile he used to give me, the one that used to make everything feel like it was okay. But nothing was okay. Not anymore. I couldn't hold it in any longer. The anger, the hurt, it was all boiling inside me. I stood up, my voice steady but sharp, and I asked him directly, "What is going on, Kenny? What's the truth?" His eyes flickered for a moment, and then that familiar defensiveness crept in. He didn't even flinch. "What are you talking about?" he said, like he was still pretending everything was fine. Things got complicated. But I'm still here, aren't I?" I felt the heat rise in my chest. It wasn't just the lies. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the arrogance, the complete lack of remorse, like he thought I was stupid. He looked at me like I was nothing, as if this was all some game, and he was still winning. And then, as if to punctuate the conversation, he said something that cut through me like a knife. "You're the kind of girl men settle for when they fail." I froze. My blood ran cold. The words echoed in my head, over and over again. Settle. Fail. I wasn't his backup plan. I wasn't some consolation prize. And yet, in that moment, that's exactly how he made me feel. He had used me, manipulated me, and discarded me when something better came along. And he was proud of it. The tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, the rage hit me like a wave. I wasn't going to sit there and let him degrade me any longer. I snapped. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and full of every ounce of hurt I'd kept hidden for so long. I lunged at him, shoving him with every ounce of anger I had left. My hands flew as I started grabbing at his things, his clothes, his shoes, his stupid, expensive jacket. I threw them all out the door, one after the other, my hands trembling but determined. "You don't get to do this," I shouted, my voice hoarse from the screaming. "You don't get to walk in here like everything's fine, like I'm some fool you can use and throw away." He stood there, frozen for a second, clearly stunned by my outburst. But I wasn't done. Not yet. "If you're not gone in 5 minutes," I said, my voice low but unwavering, "I'm calling your new fiancé. I'll tell her everything. How you used me. How you lied to both of us. I'll tell her everything." The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. The look on his face shifted. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw a flicker of guilt, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough. I wasn't going to beg him to leave. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to let him have the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart anymore. He had taken everything from me already. My trust, my dignity, my sense of self, but he wasn't taking my power. Not anymore. I turned on my heel, heading toward the door. "Get out, and don't come back." He opened his mouth, probably to argue or make some pathetic excuse, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped out of the room, my heart still, pounding, but my resolve stronger than ever. I didn't need him, not anymore. And if he thought he could walk all over me again, he was sorely mistaken. I had taken back my power, and it felt like I was breathing for the first time in ages. I didn't want to check my bank statements. I really didn't. But something inside me knew I had to. I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. So I sat down at my desk, opened up my laptop, and started scrolling through the recent transactions. I tried to tell myself it was just curiosity, just needing to know if everything was okay. But deep down, I already knew. I could feel the weight of it in my chest. And then I saw it. Thousands of dollars had gone missing. A large chunk of it was from subscription charges. Services I'd never even signed up for, things I didn't remember agreeing to. There were dinners, multiple dinners, at fancy restaurants I didn't even know existed. Each one more expensive than the last, with charges that added up quickly. And then, the worst one. A payment for an engagement ring. My engagement ring. The one he had bought for her. It was all right there in black and white. He had used my credit card, my money, to buy the ring for her. For someone else. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. It wasn't just the money. I could have replaced the money. But this was a violation on a deeper level. It was like he had been stealing from me every time I thought I was helping him. Every time I thought I was being generous, supporting someone I loved. But all along he was taking. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to process everything. I wanted to scream, to throw my laptop against the wall, but I couldn't. I just sat there in silence, feeling the weight of what he'd done. I knew what I could do next. I could report the charges, get my money back. But then the reality hit me. Most of it wasn't something I could just undo. The subscriptions, they were already used. The dinners, a couple of them had been paid in cash. And the ring, I couldn't legally touch that. It was already in her hands. I thought about calling the police, pressing charges. But then, something inside me shifted. I realized that even if I could get the money back, even if I could get him in trouble, it wouldn't fix what had been broken. It wouldn't change what he had taken from me. I didn't need him to pay me back. What he'd really taken from me was so much deeper than money. It wasn't just my money he drained. It was my trust. It was my sense of safety, that feeling of knowing I was with someone who had my back. He had robbed me of my peace, of my confidence. He made me question my own judgment, my own ability to trust people. I didn't want him to have that power over me anymore. So, I made a choice. I wasn't going to press charges. I wasn't going to keep fighting for something that would only keep me stuck in the past. I wanted to move forward. I wanted to take back the parts of myself that he had taken without asking. I couldn't undo what had happened, but I could choose not to let it define me. I could choose to move on. And that, in the end, was the one thing he couldn't take from me. I wish I could say I was prepared for what happened next. But I wasn't. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me all at once. It started with losing my job. It wasn't anything I saw coming. One day, everything was fine. I was doing my job, keeping my head down, doing the best I could. But then, just like that, the company decided to downsize. I was part of the cut. I had no savings, no backup plan. I thought I had time to figure things out, but now I was faced with reality. Bills piled up faster than I could keep track, and I couldn't make rent. The apartment I had once shared with Kenny now felt more like a prison, a reminder of everything I had lost, everything that had been taken from me. At first, I tried to make do. I sold what little I could, skipped meals, made excuses. But soon, I was down to nothing. I lived off rice and instant noodles for days, sometimes longer. That was all I could afford. There were nights when I'd just sit on the floor, staring at the empty walls, wondering how everything had gone so wrong, so quickly. I knew I had to do something. So I swallowed my pride and went to the food bank. I remember the feeling of walking in, the long line of people ahead of me, all waiting for something to eat. It wasn't just the hunger that gnawed at me, it was the humiliation, the loneliness. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to need help. But there I was, standing in line, holding a ticket with a number on it, just like everyone else. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to pretend none of this was happening, to turn back time and erase everything. But life doesn't work like that, does it? Even worse, Kenny kept texting me, over and over again. Every few days his name would pop up on my phone, and I'd feel that familiar mix of anger and confusion. He'd ask if I was okay, if I needed anything, if we could talk. I'd block him, every time. But somehow, he'd find a way back in, sending messages through different numbers, different accounts. I didn't understand it. Didn't he know he had already ruined everything? Didn't he realize he was the last person I wanted to hear from? I didn't want him back. I didn't want any part of him anymore. But that didn't stop the ache. It wasn't about wanting him. It was about the fact that he had erased me. He had taken everything. And now it felt like I was a ghost of who I used to be. Like I didn't matter to anyone, not even to myself. Every time I blocked him, I hoped it would be the end. But it wasn't. It never was. He kept trying, and I kept blocking. And somewhere in between, I couldn't escape the feeling that I was still attached to him in ways I didn't want to be. It wasn't that I wanted him back. It was that I wanted to stop feeling like I'd been erased from his life. From everyone's life. I wanted to stop feeling invisible, like I was nothing more than a footnote in his story. And I realized then, blocking him wasn't enough. Moving on wasn't about cutting him off. It was about cutting through the lies he'd told me, the ones I had believed. It was about healing, even when the process felt impossible. Even when the loneliness was suffocating. I wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. I was fighting to remember who I was. To remember that I wasn't defined by what he'd done to me. I was more than the sum of my mistakes, more than the mess he'd left behind. But the hardest part? That was accepting that healing wasn't going to happen overnight. There were still days when I couldn't look in the mirror without feeling like I'd failed. But I kept going. I kept waking up every day, even if it felt like one small step forward, followed by 2 steps back. Because somewhere deep inside, I knew that I wasn't done yet, and neither was my story. One day, in the middle of all the chaos, I met Rosalie. She was my neighbor, someone I'd never really noticed before, always keeping to herself. But one evening, she knocked on my door. "I heard you were looking for a roommate," she said, her voice calm and even. "I'm interested. I can pay rent up front if that helps." It wasn't much, a simple offer. But in that moment, it felt like a lifeline. I didn't know if I was ready for a roommate, or if I even wanted the company. But I needed stability. I needed something, anything, to get me out of the hole I'd been sinking into. So I said yes. Rosalie moved in quietly. She kept to herself, spending most of her time in her room, not pushing for conversation. It was like we both understood that neither of us was in a place to force anything. She didn't try to fix me, didn't ask questions about my past, or try to dive into my life. But slowly, over time, her quiet presence started to change things. She didn't crowd me. She didn't judge. She simply existed, and that was enough. Her respect for my space, her ability to live without complicating things, it gave me room to breathe, to think, to begin piecing things together in my own time. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was always easy, light, uncomplicated. It felt like I was finding a small patch of peace, one that I hadn't realized I'd been missing, so didn't fix me. But she gave me enough space to stop falling apart. That was enough. More than enough in those quiet moments when I'd hear the faint sound of her moving around or the soft hum of the TV in the other room. I realized that I wasn't alone anymore, not in the way I had been before. I was learning to stand on my own again, with no expectations and no pressure. Just a quiet sense of stability that felt like the first step toward something better. I didn't have many options left. So, I found myself taking a warehouse job. The kind of work that drained you physically, emotionally, and every other way possible. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I told myself it was just temporary, just something to get me through. But the truth was, it was brutal. The long hours, the heavy lifting, the constant exhaustion. Every day felt like my body was being pushed to its limits, and by the time I came home, I could barely move. I kept going, though. I had to. There was no other choice. But eventually, my body couldn't take it anymore. One afternoon, I felt dizzy. My vision blurred. I stumbled, my legs gave out, and before I knew it, I was on the ground, blacking out. When I came to, I was sitting on the cold concrete floor, and Rosalie was crouched in front of me, looking worried, but calm. "I'm calling HR," she said, her voice steady but firm. "You're not going back to work until this is sorted out." I tried to wave her off. I didn't want to make a scene, but she wasn't having it. She pulled out her phone and called HR right then and there, her voice unwavering as she demanded, "They take responsibility. They can't have you working in these conditions without protection," she said, her words sharp and confident. "You need sick days and you need proper medical care. You're not going back until we know you're okay." I was stunned. In that moment, I realized how much I'd been doing everything on my own, pushing through everything without asking for help. And here was Rosalie, stepping in for me, fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. HR agreed, and I was given a few sick days to recover. I spent the next several days resting, sleeping more than I thought possible, trying to heal from the physical strain I'd been ignoring for far too long. It was slow, painful, but it was a chance to breathe, to recover. And more than that, it was a chance to recognize something I hadn't fully understood before. That was the first time in years someone fought for me. And it wasn't a man. It wasn't someone who'd promised to love me or protect me. It wasn't someone who had anything to gain from me. It was just Rosalie, my quiet, steady roommate, who saw me, who cared enough to speak up when I couldn't. That moment changed something in me. I realized I didn't need someone to fix me. I needed people who would stand with me when I couldn't, stand alone. And I didn't have to fight my way back on my own. Rosalie had reminded me of something simple but powerful, that I was worth fighting for. It was a rainy afternoon when Kenny showed up again, like a ghost from the past, trying to make things right. He knocked on the door, hesitant but determined. I didn't want to see him. I didn't need to hear anything he had to say, but Rosalie was there, and she stepped back to give us space. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, eyes darting, nervously. Then he handed me a small velvet box. "I brought the real engagement ring," he said, his voice quiet. "You should do whatever you want with it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to give this back. I wanted to make things right." I opened the box slowly, and there it was. The same sparkling ring, the one I had seen in photos on Instagram, the one he had bought, with my money. It didn't feel like a symbol of love or a promise anymore. It was just a reminder of everything he had taken from me. But he wasn't done. He pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. "I've saved up $1,500, he said. "It's for the money I owe you. I know it's not enough, but it's something. Please take it." I stared at the cash, a part of me wanting to throw it back at him, to refuse his pathetic attempt at repayment. But I didn't. I took the money, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a small sense of control. I sold the ring the next day. I didn't need a reminder of him, and I didn't want it taking up space in my life anymore. I used the money to put into savings, a small act of reclaiming what was mine, what he had taken from me. Kenny called it closure. He probably thought that by giving me the ring and the money, he had done enough to make up for what he'd done. But I knew better. I called it interest on the debt he owed me. because no amount of money could ever truly repay what he had taken. But it was a start, a small, steady step toward moving on, and that was enough. I started fresh, one step at a time. I found a new job with better hours, something that gave me a bit more freedom and less physical strain. Slowly, my finances started to stabilize. I kept the habit of saving, not just for the security it gave me, but for the reminder that I was building something solid, a foundation I could stand on. Rosalie was still my roommate, and things between us had grown comfortable, quiet. It was a simple, peaceful existence, just what I needed. No drama, no false promises, just a safe space to rebuild myself. And then, one day I found out that Kenny had finally moved away. He was gone for good this time, out of my life, out of my space. There was no more of him creeping back into my world, no more unwanted reminders of everything he had done. I felt a weight lift off my chest. Peace, real peace, started to settle in. I looked back on everything that had happened, everything I had survived, and realized how far I had come. I wasn't the same person who had let him walk all over me. I had learned to set boundaries, to speak up for myself, to stand firm when the world tried to knock me down. I had discovered strength I didn't know I had, a wisdom I had earned, the hard way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of who I was becoming. It wasn't just the job, the money, or even the new apartment. It was the person I was inside, the one who had finally learned how to heal, how to walk, away from the past and step into the future with my head held high. If you've ever had to rebuild after someone wrecked your world, I hope you know you're not alone. Leave a comment if you've been there too. We don't heal in silence. We heal when we're heard. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been through something similar, or just need a reminder that you're not alone, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be sharing more stories, more lessons, and more moments of healing. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. Let's keep growing together.